Trump signed an executive order called Eradicating Anti-Christian Bias. And that immediately made me wonder if it would affect me. Not because I'm prejudiced against Christians, but because certain bad actors would construe me as being prejudiced simply because I have had the audacity to be critical of religion, including Christianity and the culture of hypocrisy that plagues it. Now, that might seem to be a ridiculous thing to worry about, but bear in mind a couple of things. First of all, being free to criticize Christianity without worrying about negative consequences for doing so is a situation that is a historical outlier. Throughout most of the last 2,000 years, criticizing Christianity could get you fired, ostracized, and, depending on how far back you go, sentenced to death. We're talking about cancel culture on steroids. So not that outlandish to worry about, especially for someone my age who remembers a time when atheists absolutely had to stay in the closet or risk their physical safety and or livelihood. And it's especially not ridiculous to worry about when the person focusing their attention on this is the most powerful person in the world. Secondly, we've already witnessed this administration's willingness to go after private institutions in order to control their political stances or perceived political stances. For example, they've gone after colleges and media outlets. It wouldn't surprise me if they go after social media platforms too, remove any sort of subsidies or access to vital infrastructure, or change policies that would significantly negatively impact them unless they get rid of certain accounts like mine. Trump has already threatened to remove Section 230 protections from social media platforms. In fact, Trump already tried to pressure Twitter to delete accounts critical of him back during his first term, before Elon Musk took over. But nobody talks about that. They only like to talk about the Twitter files in which they accuse Biden, who wasn't even a government official at the time, of getting them to suppress the Hunter Biden laptop story, which was prevented from being shared on Twitter for 24 hours. Never mind the actual President of the United States at that time pressuring them to delete the accounts of regular citizens for being critical of him, a clear violation of their First Amendment rights. And as we saw during the inauguration, the people who run the social media platforms lined up to kiss the ring and bend the knee, publicly displaying their willingness to work with Trump. So my concerns have precedent. And if the Trump administration did that to me, they would undoubtedly try to legally legitimize it by claiming that I have an anti-Christian bias. What's next? Deportation? Even though I was born and raised here? Ridiculous, right? Well, not anymore. Trump said he wants to be able to send American-born citizens to foreign prisons. You might say, okay, but he's only talking about the worst criminals. Yeah, and that's entirely subjective, isn't it? For some people, criticizing their religion is a terrible, unforgivable crime worthy of death. I could see them justifying it by claiming that this is a Christian nation, so I have no place here. Regardless, do you not see the slippery slope we're on? If you were to make such an argument, do you not see how many concessions you'd have to make just to be arguing about deporting American citizens? We're all the frogs in the boiling water now. It's done heating up. It's boiling.
Federal agents detained and questioned Hassan Piker at O'Hare International Airport in Chicago, and I don't care if you love him, you detest him, you don't know who the hell this big-bodied, small-headed bastard who every picture it looks like he wants to make out with himself is. But the situation and this news, at the very least, it should make you somewhat concerned, because it's not just this outlier situation that's happening in a bubble. And with what just happened, you have him claiming that his detention and interrogation were not random. Hassan going public and saying that he was questioned about his political views, including whether he supports Trump and whether he's connected to Hamas or affiliated groups in the region, and ultimately accusing the administration of trying to silence dissent with intimidation. Right, one of the things that we need to note here, because we're talking about someone trying to enter the country, we've seen a number of instances, is that Hassan was born in New Jersey and he's a U.S. citizen.
Like, there was a time on stage, I think on Saturday night, that I was like, oh my God, if what I said gets recorded and sent out, like, I could maybe not get let back into the country. Like, literally, I had a friend, Jenna Friedman, who just posted on Instagram, comedian, that she was performing in Vancouver, and when she came back to America, in customs asked, what do you do? She said she's a comedian. They said, do you talk about politics in your set, and do you make fun of the president?
The executive order starts by acknowledging our religious liberty as established by the First Amendment of the Constitution. It also acknowledges the Civil Rights Act prohibiting religious discrimination in employment, and it acknowledges federal hate crime laws, which prohibit offenses committed due to religious animus. And all of that is fine, right? So the executive order seems to be leveraging a precedent of religious freedom in the United States that is not limited to any one religion, which leads me to ask, why is Christianity being singled out in this executive order? That is answered in the following paragraph, which states, quote, "Yet the previous administration engaged in an egregious pattern of targeting peaceful Christians while ignoring violent anti-Christian offenses. The Biden Department of Justice sought to squelch faith in the public square by bringing federal criminal charges and obtaining in numerous cases multi-year prison sentences against nearly 24 peaceful pro-life Christians for praying and demonstrating outside abortion facilities. Those convicted included a Catholic priest and 75-year-old grandmother, as well as an 87-year-old woman and a father of 11 children who were arrested 18 months after praying and singing hymns outside an abortion facility in Tennessee as a part of a politically motivated prosecution campaign by the Biden administration. I rectified this injustice on January 23rd, 2025, by issuing pardons in these cases. I cannot stress enough how much of a lie that is. Trump did indeed pardon about 24 people who were involved with these abortion clinic protests. I looked into the people Trump pardoned and what they actually did, which included admissions, live-streamed video, guilty pleas, and long felony criminal histories of doing these things, including arrests and convictions that were done by the Department of Justice under Trump's first administration, not just Biden's. First of all, these people were found guilty of felony conspiracy. In other words, they got together and coordinated a plan to commit felonies, and then they acted upon that plan. They would do things like lie about needing medical attention, make an appointment pretending to be a patient, and then when someone from the clinic unlocked the door to let them in as a patient, they forcibly held the door open for their dozen co-conspirators to charge in, trespass inside the building, physically occupy and blockade the clinic, including all the doors within the building. In the DC case, in which Trump pardoned everyone, they knocked a nurse to the floor and injured her. They came in with bags filled with ropes and chains. They took all the chairs in the waiting room and barricaded them against the entrance so nobody could leave or enter, and they chained themselves up. One of the people Trump pardoned, Bevelyn Williams, injured a woman by crushing her hand in the door. When the woman screamed that her hand was being crushed, she refused to let her hand out. She said, quote, "We're going to terrorize you so good. Your business is over, mama," unquote. Her blockade at a medical center in Fort Myers, Florida, resulted in a dozen patient delays, including 3 of whom were, quote, scheduled for time-sensitive procedures that could have resulted in bleeding, infection, and significant pain without timely treatment, unquote, according to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Trump pardoned her under the narrative that she was persecuted for being a Christian. Imagine the person you love the most in this world going through that, through pain, bleeding, and infection because of these assholes, and then the president to paint those assholes as the real victims who were persecuted simply for peacefully praying.
Now, surveillance video shows that the clinic lobby was packed with protesters blocking access to that clinic. Now, the video also shows a patient crawled through a small receptionist window to be able to see her own doctor.
Remembering a child alive with no anesthetic.
This video was shot by activist group Progressive Anti-Abortion Uprising October 2020. Prosecutors say it proves they conspired to lock and block the clinic from operating, a violation of the Federal FACE Act.
These people were violent, and they committed not only assault, but battery too. And they did so with the specific intent to shut down medical facilities. And they also interrupted operations that had nothing to do with abortion. Bizarrely, when they went to arrest one of them, a woman by the name of Lauren Handy, who has a long criminal history of doing things like this, they found 5 human fetuses in her refrigerator at her apartment. Trump pardoned her.
Yeah, Adam, I'm telling you what, kind of a bizarre, gruesome house of horrors here in a crowded D.C. neighborhood. D.C. police say they found those 5 fetuses right down here in this apartment, which is connected to that anti-abortion activist, Lauren Handy.
Far from being persecuted, the law has actually been unfairly lenient on these people because they were chronic repeat offenders. One of them had been doing this since the 1980s and had been arrested for it over 40 times. This time, she received 3 years probation. I want you to do a little thought experiment for me. Remove politics from the issue. I want you to imagine what would happen to you if you blockaded and trespassed on various businesses with the specific intent to shut them down. And in the process, there were injuries, harm to customers, police standoffs, etc. And you did that over and over and over again. What do you think your punishments would start to look like long before you ever got to the 40th time? Well, this woman got 3 years probation. That result isn't because she's a persecuted Christian. It's because she's a privileged Christian. These people are taking advantage of extreme amounts of privilege and preferential treatment in the justice system and calling it persecution. That's how absurd this is. It's unfair that I only got 12 cupcakes and Johnny only got 1 cupcake. I'm being persecuted because I should have all 13 cupcakes. That's how ridiculous these people are. You know, one of the main complaints that Trump supporters have is that the left is too soft on crime, that the left allows people to be repeat offenders. Well, these people had a history of getting minor slaps on the wrist for these same offenses in the past. And this time, some of the main organizers of these events got some relatively short prison sentences of a few years, but most of them still only got probation. Imagine forcing your way into a medical clinic, injuring people in the process, blockading the door so that people can't leave or enter, chaining yourself up, refusing to leave, and then expect to not get in trouble for it. And when you do get in trouble for it, after having gotten in trouble for it in the past, you call it an injustice. That is beyond entitlement. But I'm sure they did expect to get in trouble for it. Anyone would expect that. What we would not expect is for an insanely corrupt president to recognize them as political pawns and tell blatant lies about what they did in an official executive order, despite all the evidence to the contrary. But that's what we should expect from now on, using blatant lies to justify policy decisions. Trump is 100% on board with this narrative. To hear Trump tell the story, all they were doing was peacefully protesting outside of the clinic by innocently praying and singing. And the mean, vicious Biden administration targeted them just because they're Christians. Never mind that Biden has been a devout Catholic his entire life, and that Trump has expressed zero interest in religion or going to church until he ran for president. Never mind that Trump clearly knows nothing about the Bible.
Okay. You mentioned the Bible. You've been talking about how it's your favorite book. And you said, I think last night in Iowa, some people are surprised that you say that. I'm wondering what one or two of your most favored Bible verses are and why.
I wouldn't want to get into it because to me that's very personal. You know, when I talk about the Bible, it's very personal. So I don't want to get into verses. I don't want to get into.
There's no verse that means a lot to you that you think about or cite?
The Bible means a lot to me, but I don't want to get into specifics.
Even to cite a verse that
you
like?
No, I don't want to do that.
You're an Old Testament guy or a New Testament guy?
Probably equal. I think it's just an incredible. The whole Bible is an incredible idea.
It's all about power. Who has the power? That's all that matters to people like Trump. He can gain and maintain more influence by appealing to the Christian majority. So he will absolutely do that by selling these bullshit narratives. And he will do that by pretending to be a Christian, one who can't even cite a single verse in the Bible.
I have a very great relationship with evangelicals, and I think that's why I'm doing so well with Iowa.
And I think he likes being seen as chosen by God. These people sort of worship Trump himself, and I think that appeals to him. Let me introduce you to Trump's spiritual advisor.
Wherever I go, God rules. When I walk on White House grounds, God walks on White House grounds. I had every right and authority to declare the White House as holy ground because I was standing there, and where I stand is holy.
To say no to President Trump would be saying no to God. And I won't do that.
We are in a spiritual war right now. Let every demonic network that has aligned itself against the purpose, against the calling of President Trump, let it be broken, let it be torn down in the name of Jesus. You want me to tell you what my thoughts are? The thoughts of the King of Kings, the thoughts of the Lord of Lords. I'm downloading heaven. Hey!
To say no to President Trump would be saying no to God. That was Paula White, and she heads the new White House Faith Office and will play a significant role in a new task force for eliminating Christian bias. What do you suppose she would do with someone like me?
The church is supposed to direct the government. The government is not supposed to direct the church. That is not how our founding fathers intended it. And I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk that's not in the Constitution. It was in a stinking letter, and it means nothing like what they say it does.
That was Lauren Boebert, a United States representative, claiming that the church is supposed to direct the government and that church-state separation isn't even a thing. These are the people in power right now. Now, you might say that extreme religious people have always had positions of power in the United States. And while that may be true, what we haven't seen before is the complete subversion of our other branches of government, because they've been rendered powerless through the Supreme Court's decision to grant the president immunity from committing crimes. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but we somehow found ourselves in this absurd timeline. For years now, I've said that they're going to turn Trump into a religious figure. And that's exactly what we're witnessing. Most of the religious figures we know of are mysteriously shrouded behind centuries of history, so we don't get to see their creation in real time. But I think that's what we're getting to see right now. This is how it looks. Trump is as immune as God himself. Beyond his legal immunity, a lot of the praise he gets is because of solving problems that he himself caused, solving them by backpedaling and calling it negotiation. Now, despite being a petty, lying, narcissistic, hedonistic, materialistic, selfish, spoiled, privileged, ignorant, bullying jackass, he can do no wrong in their eyes, ever. Just imagine for a moment what would happen if any other president posted a picture of himself as the Pope on an official White House account right after the Pope died. Absolutely absurd double standards are applied to Trump. Trump gets to cheat on all of his wives, cheat on his taxes, accept bribes from foreign governments, engage in election interference, and none of it even matters to them. And when Trump eventually dies, the lies will become legend, and there will be grotesque amounts of revisionism, even more than that which occurs in the present, which is significant, to the point in which the man people revere in the future will be nothing like the man who actually existed in real life in our time. That is how religions begin. Compare and contrast Trump's treatment of the abortion clinic protests to the Palestinian protests on college campuses. Now, there were some incidents that were comparable because students entered and occupied a library, for instance, and refused to leave, though they weren't interrupting important medical procedures, which is significantly worse in my opinion. Regardless, those students were all arrested, as you would expect. But the reaction to these cases are very different. For the anti-abortion protesters who committed more serious violations, Trump gives pardons across the board and calls them persecuted. For the people protesting the war in Gaza, Trump wants to ship them off to a strict foreign gulag or even a war zone, whether they're citizens of the United States or not. And then he goes after the school itself, threatening to defund them, even though they're the ones who called the police. But the argument is that they may not have called the police fast enough. And these grotesquely disparate reactions are enthusiastically applauded by Trump's supporters. The difference in treatment is not about tactics, it's about topic. That's a dangerous new precedent in terms of freedom of speech. It should be the tactic that convicts you, not the topic. The only exception to that would be additional hate crime charges, which can add to the seriousness of the crime. But Trump's Department of Justice is doing it the other way around. You're allowed to do felonious strong-arm protests as long as they agree with the topic, in this case being anti-abortion. When they disagree with your reason for protesting and you violate a law during your protest, no matter how minor, then suddenly it's a law and order country again. But the irony there is that the Trump administration wants to violate the law in their punishments. When the law and order president wants to punish you, he himself will violate the law and ignore court orders, which he can do now because, like I said, he's as immune as God. If law and order only applies to some but not to others, then it's not really law and order at all. What's interesting to me is that the two different groups' reasons for protesting actually aren't all that different, but the perceptions of the topics are. Both of these groups of protesters, the anti-abortion protesters and the anti-war protesters, perceive themselves as protesting the killing of children. In the case of the anti-abortion protesters, they believe that tiny clusters of cells that have never before even experienced consciousness are children who are being murdered by their own parents and doctors. In the case of the people protesting the war in Gaza, They complain about actual born children, tens of thousands of children, from babies to toddlers to teenagers, being blown to pieces by Israel. And we know this is happening because there's not only witnesses, but there's also video, which I have been unfortunate enough to have seen. But the people who protest the deaths of those children are painted as terrorist anti-Semites. Two totally different standards. Some deaths matter more than others, and you can clearly see that in how differently the protests of their deaths are treated. If you're anti-abortion because you believe it's killing children, know that actual children, in which there can be no argument that they are actual children, already born, walking, talking, breathing, eating, sleeping, crying children, know that they are currently being killed by the thousands, viciously, violently, and remorselessly by Israel, and protesting that is not anti-Semitic. It's not being against the Jewish people who are not defined by what the government of Israel does. In fact, I would call it anti-Semitic to spread the lie that to be a Jew means to support the government of Israel and their ongoing slaughter. Would you think any differently about it if unborn fetuses were the ones being killed in Gaza? Because I guarantee you pregnant women have been killed over there as well. But the truth doesn't matter anymore. Consider this Fox News story with the headline, quote, "Canadian Catholic student arrested and charged after saying men and women are different." That's just such a blatant lie, and it should be obvious to you. What really happened was that he started organizing these disruptive protests at his Catholic school, and his protests involved bullying and harassing other students. The school stepped in, and he was subsequently expelled for a year and told that if he returned, he would be trespassed. So what do you think he did? He returned and got into a physical confrontation with other students, and he was arrested. And bear in mind that we're talking about a Catholic school. Yet to hear Fox News tell the story, he's a poor, persecuted Christian who was punished merely for saying men and women are different. Not only is it factually incorrect to say that's why he got in trouble, but a lot of these people see it as religious persecution if they are not allowed to persecute other certain minorities, because they see the persecution of certain minorities as a necessary part of their worship. Though, of course, they don't see it as persecution, but that doesn't change the fact that it is, in fact, persecution. Freedom does not include the right to violate the rights of others. That's not freedom. And when you are prevented from violating the rights of others, you are not being persecuted. If you are the one violating the rights of others, then you are the one being the persecutor. And there's nothing in your religion that says in order to worship God, you have to harass and bully people who don't share your beliefs. They don't even have a leg to stand on from a faithful Christian standpoint. The reason such shameless double standards exist is because the people behind them don't care about right and wrong. They don't care about moral or immoral. That's one thing that took me so long to understand, because it's difficult for me to put myself in those shoes. Don't fall for the religious posturing about morality. That's not why they do what they do. For them, this is really about winning by any means necessary, plain and simple. Their positions are based on pretend ethics. They used to make fun of women's sports until women's sports gave them an excuse to bully trans people. Then they pretended to care about women's sports.
All the trans people that are serving go above and beyond the standards, and they do their job every day.
But it's interesting to hear that we are too strong for sports, but too weak for the military.
The reason their arguments contradict, the reason they're completely infested with hypocrisy, is precisely because they have no principles other than doing whatever it takes to win. That means they cannot afford to concede, confess, or concern themselves with any sort of ethical good faith argumentation. The same people who cry their crocodile tears about abortions don't give two shits about the thousands of born children being killed by Israel. It's all pretend ethics. When you get in trouble for violating the law, the best thing you can hope for is to become a political pawn for a trending topic that crosses over into pretend ethics. Then you get to have highly popular news outlets publish blatantly false info about how persecuted you are, when really you're just a criminal bullying people. If you do highly criminal behavior in the name of being an anti-abortion protester, and the trouble you get into goes beyond the slaps on the wrist you've been getting your whole life, then your hope lies in becoming a political pawn. Then you get to enjoy a get-out-of-jail-free card from Trump himself. But if Trump thought that abortion would help him politically, then he would absolutely support it. He has no principles or beliefs other than that which serves Trump. He set the example for these shameless double standards. And of course, double standards always existed, but not like this, not this blatant, not this brazenly shameless. So unfortunately, we're going to have to live with that as the new reality for the foreseeable future. What we're seeing now is the explicit development of privileged classes in our society. And of course, those too already existed. We know that. But now they're attempting to enshrine it in the government with the excuse that they are the ones being persecuted, which is the most absurd distortion of reality you could possibly come up with. They're putting the boot to the necks of the people who have actually been persecuted, and they're calling them the persecutors. It's an Orwellian inversion of reality, and it's designed to deliberately confuse the issue.
So what's going on, Todd?
Jesse, thanks for having me on, but I shouldn't be here, right? I mean, first of all, this is an illegal immigration issue because likely of Biden's lawlessness at the border and everything going on down there. That's why Indiana, as a non-border state, has actually filed several independent lawsuits on that. Then we have the rape, and then we have this abortion activist acting as a doctor with a history of failing to report. So we're gathering the information, we're gathering the evidence as we speak, and we're going to fight this to the end. Including looking at her licensure if she failed to report. And in Indiana, it's a crime to not report, to intentionally not report.
So what
Do you know what that story was about? You see, a 10-year-old girl was raped and had to get an abortion. The story gained a lot of traction because people were seeing it as a reason to not make abortions illegal. The right-wing media sphere immediately accused the story of being fake news. They said the little girl didn't even exist because naturally they didn't want to reveal her identity for obvious reasons. But it turned out that she actually did exist. And they found out that the guy who raped her was an illegal immigrant. Bam! They had their angle. This was all Biden's fault for having open borders. You see the result? 10-year-olds getting raped. But it turned out that the guy actually crossed the border during Trump's first term. So that angle of attack quickly fell apart, but that didn't really stop them from using it anyway. In the end, these people went after the doctor who did the abortion on the 10-year-old girl. And that is how the story ended. Someone had to pay the price. It couldn't be the little girl who turned out to exist. It couldn't be Biden, who wasn't even president when the guy crossed the border. So they went after the doctor, who very well may have saved the little girl's life, but instead is being painted as a monster for saving a little girl from enduring a rape pregnancy. That's what we're dealing with. The anti-abortion groups are winning, and they're not winning because they're principled. They're not winning because they're rising up from persecution. They're winning because they're powerful, they're privileged, and they play by nobody's rules, including their own.
Today I'm signing an executive order to make our Attorney General, who's a great person, she's going to be a great Attorney General, Pam Bondi, the head of a task force, brand new, to eradicate anti-Christian bias. About time, right? Anti-Christian bias. Yeah, you never heard of that one before, right? But it's about time, isn't it, though, really? So many times you hear, but you don't hear the anti-Christian bias.
So in response to imaginary persecution, in the executive order, Trump establishes a, quote, task force to eradicate anti-Christian bias, after lying and being very misleading about several other examples, including Biden declaring Easter as Transgender Day of Visibility, when in actuality March 31st was established as Transgender Day of Visibility back in 2009, 15 years before Easter of 2024. But March 31st also just so happened to be the date Easter landed on in 2024, which Biden also acknowledged as the president and as a Catholic. This year, Easter fell on April 20th. Was it the president who magically made it so? No, of course not. But the truth doesn't matter to these people. They will be as misleading as possible as long as it serves their agenda. The executive order also cites examples of Christians not being allowed to discriminate against other protected groups, and it calls that a violation of their faith. In other words, Christians not being allowed to discriminate is discrimination against Christians. It's absurd. It would be like saying that robbing banks is how we honor God in my religion. So if you don't allow me to rob banks, then you are violating my religious freedom. Imagine if I even prayed while robbing a bank so that when I'm arrested, the media could spin the story and say that Trump's Department of Justice is prosecuting people for just peacefully praying in public. The task force to eliminate anti-Christian bias is composed of the following powerful people. The task force is charged with finding and eliminating any anti-Christian policies and behavior. They are to solicit information and ideas from people affected by anti-Christian conduct and faith-based organizations. They're tasked with finding deficiencies in current laws that allow for anti-Christian behavior and to recommend ways to fully enforce the law against anti-Christian hostility. They're tasked with recommending any additional presidential or legislative action necessary to rectify past improper anti-Christian conduct. How are they defining anti-Christian conduct? We don't really know, but the examples they gave involve not allowing Christians to break the law. Apparently, when a Christian doesn't like something, you're supposed to allow them to trespass, barricade, disrupt, harass, and assault, and if you don't allow them to do that, then you are guilty of anti-Christian behavior, because the story will be that all they were doing was peacefully praying, and you, being the spawn of Satan, just couldn't allow that. So someone like me, who isn't merely trying to stop people from trespassing on my property, but who is explicitly critical of Christianity and various Christians, would definitely be seen as problematic and conducting anti-Christian behavior. Trump is very much motivated by social media and vice versa. The social media spin was that those people were arrested for being Christians and just peacefully praying in public, those anti-abortion protesters. That was the narrative that circulated, not the truth, the narrative. That narrative has a lot of fuel in its tank because Christian persecution is baked into the religion itself. The religion itself says you'll be persecuted. So in order for the religion to be true, Christians have to believe that they're being persecuted, even when they've been such a dominant force around the world for so many centuries, even when they themselves are the persecutors. So when you resist a Christian and prevent them from having their way, there's an inherent temptation to cry persecution, because that is what is instilled by their religion. The problem with that is in Western civilization, Christians are an extremely privileged class of people. So it takes gargantuan levels of cognitive dissonance to perceive themselves as persecuted. Such a position can be very well camouflaged to the Christian when their religion loses influence and they go from privileged to normal, because to a privileged person, losing privilege can easily be mistaken for persecution, when really they're just going from being treated in a privileged way to being treated no differently than anyone else. So when you go to jail for a strong-arm protest in which you coordinate in a felony conspiracy, trespass, blockade, refuse to leave, disrupt business, halt medical treatment, harass, threaten, and injure people, then there will be those who claim that you are the one being singled out simply for being a Christian who was persecuted for simply praying in public. When such narratives circulate, people just post first and don't even look into it. And that's the other reason such narratives are so easy to spread. They have to hurry up and jump aboard the trending bandwagon in order to benefit from the engagement, because it has temporary virality. So that window of opportunity is going to close. Can't worry about the truth when your concern is quick and easy social media popularity. Not everybody has the stamina and consistency to build up a channel over 2 decades the way I did. The quick and easy path causes social media to get suddenly flooded with the topic. Trump sees it, he pays attention to it. Normally, it would begin and end online, and the reality would remain regardless of what people online say. The reality is that a jury got to see and hear what these people actually did, and the jury, likely Christians themselves, came to a verdict, as far as the ones who didn't already plead guilty, that is. And statistically, most of the people throughout the whole process were likely Christian too, from the cops to the lawyers to the judge and the jury. But now, because Trump acts upon the bullshit he sees online, jury decisions don't matter. Trump didn't need to look into the cases at all. Not that doing so would have affected his decision. He already made up his mind based on social media posts. Since Trump's calculus is based on popularity, he's going to comply with what his echo chamber shows him. So he made an executive decision and removed accountability for their crimes, something Trump is quite familiar with. The social media spin affected reality because Trump is affected by social media, and Trump has real power. If you can get something trending, no matter how full of shit it is, then there's a chance you can affect policy. Now, some people actually see that as a good thing, thinking it like a government by the people. But most of the time, it just ends up being a government by bullshit, because bullshit spreads far more easily than the truth, especially online, which is flooded with bad actors, opportunistic influencers, motivated reasoning, bot armies to help promote narratives, adversarial foreign influences, and trolls who get off on stoking conflict. That's who your government is by when controlled by the internet, not the people. The truth doesn't stand a chance in such an environment, and we can't keep going on this way. We can't. If we do, something is going to break, something vital. Hell, many things are already broken, and we just haven't felt the full effects yet. Here's another example of the topic overriding the tactics, and this one is far more extreme and far more explicit. It's what sets the tone for things to come. Now, in the past, as I said, the law was more concerned with whether your tactics broke the law than whether the topic broke the law, because naturally we have freedom of speech in this country, or so we thought. But now, whether your protest convicts you of a crime or gets you blessed as a hero depends on the topic, not the tactic, which is absurd. Now the Department of Justice is truly being politicized. Here's the example. The day after the January 6th storming of the Capitol, Trump went on national television and harshly condemned it.
I would like to begin by addressing the heinous attack on the United States Capitol. Like all Americans, I am outraged by the violence, lawlessness, and mayhem. I immediately deployed the National Guard and federal law enforcement to secure the building and expel the intruders. America is and must always be a nation of law and order. The demonstrators who infiltrated the Capitol have defiled the seat of American democracy. To those who engaged in the acts of violence and destruction, you do not represent our country. And to those who broke the law, you will pay.
He didn't just condemn it off the cuff. He rehearsed it.
And to those who broke the law, you will pay. You do not represent our movement. You do not represent our country. And if you broke the law, you can't say that. I'm not going to, I already said you will pay. The demonstrators who infiltrated the Capitol have defied the seat of justice. It's defiled, right? See, I can't see it very well. Okay, I'll do this. I'm going to do this. Let's go. But this election is now over. Congress has certified the results. I don't want to say the election's over. I just want to say Congress has certified the results without saying the election's over, okay?
But Congress is certified. Now Congress is
certified. Right.
Now Congress
I didn't say over, so let me see. Go to the paragraph before. Okay? I would like to begin by addressing the heinous attack yesterday. Yesterday is a hard word for me.
Just take it out. The heinous attack.
Good. Take the word yesterday, because it doesn't work with the heinous attack on our country. Say on our country. Want to say that?
No, keep it.
My only goal was to ensure the integrity of the vote. My only goal was to ensure the integrity of the vote.
His harsh words against the J6ers were meticulously planned. He said that those people that day were not part of his movement. That was the way Trump behaved under obvious pressure immediately after the fact, before a narrative had time to develop. That was back when the obviousness of their horrendous behavior was still fresh. We saw cops being beaten. We saw windows being smashed. We saw the violence and the threats of violence. Trump was still president after they did that. Trump had more than enough time to pardon them for their crimes, at least the ones who were in custody at that time. But he did not, because he knew how that would look. And Trump himself was facing some pretty serious legal trouble. But over the years, a narrative had time to fester. The narrative was entirely partisan. Gradually, the invaders of the Capitol were painted as patriots rather than traitors. Gradually, just as time heals wounds, it heals reputations, especially with the power of revisionism. And these people went from obvious traitors to political prisoners.
Good evening. We're coming on the air with more breaking news on this historic day. On the evening of his inauguration, President Donald Trump not wasting any time getting down to business. He has just returned to the White House and is signing a series of executive actions in the Oval Office, where he is pardoning some 1,500 January 6 rioters who have been convicted for participating in the attack on the Capitol 4 years ago. The president is speaking now. Let's listen in.
Yes, sir. First, we have a list of pardons and commutations relating to events that occurred on January 6, 2021.
Okay, and how many people is this?
I think this order will apply to approximately 1,500 people, sir.
So this is January 6th. These are the hostages. Approximately 1,500 for a pardon.
Yes.
Full pardon.
Full pardon or commutation?
Full pardon. We have about 6 commutations in there where we're doing further research. Nice to see you again. So this is a big one. Anything you want to explain about this? We hope they get them. We hope they come out tonight, frankly. If you're expecting it. Approximately 1,500 people. Six commutations.
Were there any cases you did not commute or pardon of people?
We're looking at different things, but the commutations would be the ones that we'll take a look, and maybe it'll stay that way, or it'll go to, full pardon.
And the order does require the Bureau of Prisons to act immediately on receipt of the pardons and commutation orders. Sir, this is an
Why don't we get that down so they can get them going right now?
Yes, sir.
Is that okay?
Yep, absolutely.
Officer Daniel Hodges had already been squished between the door and the mob screaming "heave ho." Fanone says it was like medieval combat.
These are the hostages. Approximately 1,500 for a pardon.
Yes.
Full pardon. Full pardon.
We lost the line. We lost the line. All MPDs get back. All MPDs get back up to the upper deck.
Full pardon. Full pardon. Full pardon.
And then 4 years later, the same man who harshly condemned their crimes, the day after he personally witnessed their crimes, was also the one who pardoned them for those same crimes. The law and order president, the felon who set free people who beat cops, threatened to kill his own vice president, and destroyed property at the Capitol building of the United States. I want you to imagine for a moment what Trump would have done to radical leftists who beat up cops and invaded the Capitol. It's a totally different standard. The tactics don't matter now. Only the topics. If you're on their side, then you can engage in all the illegal tactics they formerly condemned. Despite Trump's long history of sucking up to law enforcement and claiming to be pro-police, he pardoned people that violently attacked police officers. Now, I have no doubt that a big reason behind pardoning them is that they attacked those officers in Trump's name, and Trump has a soft spot for people who do things for Trump. That is, as long as it doesn't cost him anything. But more importantly than that, a narrative developed online. That narrative painted the people who stormed the Capitol as persecuted patriots. If that narrative had not developed, if they were still seen online as the traitors they really are, then Trump would have never pardoned them. Trump and social media have a symbiosis. They influence each other to a massive negative effect, and we're all forced to deal with the consequences. Now, in order to be able to plausibly post such blatant distortions, all you really need is enough time to imprint narratives and an effective social media campaign. Once you have that, you can make comparisons like the one Elon Musk made in this post and not be seen as absolutely insane. That's the power of narratives. And that's the way Trump was ever able to be elected in the first place by leveraging that power using social media in a way that other politicians didn't. Only through the absurd fakeness of social media can they even begin to pretend that they're earnestly fighting an anti-Christian bias. They're adopting the language of social justice and applying it to themselves while trying to eradicate it for everyone else. If there's any complaints about actual discrimination against Black people or LGBT people, especially transgender people, or even if schools try to teach about such things that have occurred, then they try to stop it by calling it some sort of radical DEI initiative. They send in Elon Musk to defund everything to do with it, if it can even be construed as having anything to do with the new boogeyman scapegoat acronym known as DEI. That includes things like teaching about Rosa Parks or the Underground Railroad or acknowledging Pride Month, anything like that. Defunded, silenced, canceled. Fighting against DEI is the new way to be explicitly racist. And of course, they say that Black people, Hispanics, and LGBT people are now the privileged classes. I'm not kidding. They think that they all get free money from the government and that racism against white people is now the norm. And they think that anti-Christian bias, bias against people who make up nearly 70% of the country and 98% of the government, an overwhelming majority, that anti-Christian bias is some huge problem that needs to be rectified, according to them, even to the point of creating their own Gestapo task force. And they try to justify it by lying to your face about people who physically blockaded medical clinics and assaulted people and told you that they were just peacefully praying. That is a persecution complex that is off the charts. Basically, what they're doing right now is punching you in the face and then accusing you of oppressing them because the punch sprained their wrist. But it didn't even sprain their wrist. They're just lying about it. They're taking reality and turning it upside down. It's like they looked at everything they hated, assumed that what they hate is engaging in all sorts of underhanded tactics against them, and then they decided to adopt those very tactics for themselves, even if such tactics were in fact never used against them. That's how they justify it anyway. You did it to us, so we're going to do it to you, only we never did it to them. All their accusations turned out to be confessions. Look at how they're weaponizing the government against us, they said. But wait, wouldn't it be great if we did that to them? That's essentially what's happening. It's jealousy. You could tell what they were planning to do based solely upon what they accused you of doing. That's how they showed their hand. They revel in the hypocrisy because they think they're doing poetic justice. They don't have a problem with being what they hate as long as it benefits them and hurts everyone else, because it's not about principles. It's about winning by any means necessary. That's why I'm worried about what comes next. They're setting everything up to justify atrocity. This is how it always happens. They keep testing waters that people said they would never test, waters that even they said they would never test, like deporting American-born citizens to foreign prisons. You can't believe anything that comes out of the Trump administration, and you can't believe his followers either. They will say they don't support something until the moment Trump does it, and then they'll jump on board and call it based and support it 100%. It's all lying and delay tactics. It's just like how they claimed Project 2025 was a crazy leftist conspiracy theory. And then when Trump started implementing Project 2025 by the book, they laughed and said, we lied, and we like that he's doing it. And one of the major reasons this is happening is because the Supreme Court gave Trump a blank check to do whatever he wants and not have to worry about being held accountable. I was talking to Aaron Ra about that the other day, and he put it quite well by saying that the Supreme Court essentially made themselves irrelevant. Why would Trump follow any of their orders? He can completely disregard them now, as he has. And who's going to stop him? We already know the answer because he has already disregarded court orders. Nobody. That's who. Nobody is going to stop him. He can't be charged with a crime because he's doing all of this under the guise of official capacity of the executive office, no matter how personal it truly is. And who made the Supreme Court what it is today? Which president played the biggest role in its current composition? Well, Trump himself, who appointed half of the conservative justices. And who gave Trump all of this unchecked power? Those very same justices. It's the perfect storm of bullshit, the perfect subversion, the perfect undermining. It was a 1 in a million shot for the ridiculous villain to be able to succeed in doing ridiculous villain things. At this point, his crimes are innumerable, and he'll be able to get away with them all because of a Supreme Court he himself installed. Part of the reason he was able to do that is because the Democrats have been such weak, ineffective pushovers, learning all the wrong lessons, like deciding to lean further right, as if the MAGAs are ever going to vote for Diet Trump over the real thing. Trump's behavior set a massive precedent and greatly influenced other politicians. So even long after Trump is gone, we're going to be dealing with the effects of Trumpism. Here in Florida, Ron DeSantis signed a bill making it legal to run over protesters with your car. One of the justifications often cited for that is, what if there's a medical emergency and you're blocked by these protesters? Yet, if you're politically aligned with the right, you can just skip the middleman and go right to the medical clinic itself, physically block people from receiving medical attention directly, and then not only get off the hook, but be applauded. And you might say, yeah, but they're killing babies, if that's what you believe. But like I said, they ended up affecting procedures that had nothing to do with abortion. Furthermore, they had no idea of the circumstances surrounding any abortions they delayed. They could have gotten in the way of someone who needed an abortion because they had an unviable ectopic pregnancy, for example. Speaking of which, watch this.
On line 9, we have a bullet there where, no pun intended, which states that abortion is okay to remove an ectopic pregnancy. And can you explain to me why that exception is in there?
Oh, it's what abortion does not include. I cannot say why that particular language is in here, but to me it would be common sense to put that language in here.
Senator Hamilton, you're recognized for a follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. President. But a child who is, in fact, living out part of his or her early life as the unfortunate circumstance of being an ectopic pregnancy is, in fact, still a unique human being with its own DNA. And I wonder, I just don't understand why we've created an exception where we allow those children to be murdered, but not the others.
The very people doing the legislating on this have no idea about the actual topic. There's a huge problem with the way our government is run. It's a problem that our government is chosen not for any sort of expertise, but because it's simply a popularity contest, and usually dependent on who has the most money, which is usually dependent on who they're getting bribes from. And the reason that's a problem is that people are being put in charge of issues they know nothing about. And what results from that? Well, we're witnessing the dismantling of our country because it's being run by people who are incompetent and filled with spite. It's like asking someone who knows nothing about cars to work on your car, and he also happens to be your worst enemy. The result is that he's just going to break shit on purpose. Because we don't care about expertise, and everything is reduced to a popularity contest based on who gets the most lulls and who can best own the libs. We get an absolute buffoon game show host who has never even had to drive his own car or do his own grocery shopping as the president of the United States, pretending to fight for blue-collar workers while doing everything he can to enrich his already insanely rich friends at the expense of the very people who voted for him. The irony of grossly incompetent people being put in charge is that these are the champions against DEI, and the big accusation against DEI is that they say it doesn't result in the best person being chosen for the job. Well, if that's the case, then we have a DEI president. What happens as a result of that mentality is explicit racism and sexism. These people see a black person or a woman in a role of authority and assume they got the position because of DEI. They're assuming they're incompetent just because they're black or a woman. That's just overt bigotry. But what's so disconcerting about that is such bigotry isn't being limited to the realm of a few assholes online. This bigotry has found its way into the halls of our government. And I'm not saying it wasn't always there, because it was. I know that. But the difference this time is that they're being explicit about it. And we had reached a point in which they at least couldn't be explicit about it. They had to keep it behind closed doors. And if they got caught, then they had to at least pretend to be sorry about it. Well, that clock has been rolled the fuck back. What don't they like about diversity, equity, and inclusion? Well, they want the opposite. They want homogeneity. How do I know? Well, for one, people are being screened for working in the government based on whether or not they support Trump. The hypocrisy is off the charts. Are they looking for the most qualified person? No. If the most qualified person doesn't support Trump, then the most qualified person doesn't get hired. But that's their very complaint about what would happen under DEI. Every accusation a confession. What they're accusing DEI of being is what they're enthusiastically embracing, but in their own favor. It's not about if you're qualified, it's about whether you can be trusted to be loyal no matter what. We're seeing highly qualified people in very important positions that are vital to the functioning of our country being replaced by totally incompetent buffoons whose only real qualification is whether they kiss the ring. If you were tasked with weakening America from the inside out, this is exactly what it would look like. Retract our influence from around the world, start needless conflicts and tension with our closest allies, replace all of our important positions with incompetent sycophants, pull scientific funding, pull education funding, pull medical funding, pull vital research, eliminate programs that help Americans, eliminate foreign aid that extends American goodwill, approve subsidies to corporations that play ball, essentially continuing to funnel all the money from the poor to the rich while developing a loyal upper class that doesn't dare oppose you. The result is a country that is becoming increasingly isolated and irreparably damaged. Basically, the country is being treated like a store that's going out of business, so the owners are attempting to burn it down for the insurance money. Only it's not some store, it's your home. That won't make the powers that be care about it, though. To them, it's just a means to an end. You are a means to an end. But you know what? This video is not meant to convince Trump supporters of anything. At least not the Trump influencers who shape narratives online, because I've done enough of that to learn that they don't care about any of this. Showcasing hypocrisy, debunking lies, pointing out cruelty, etc. None of that matters to them anymore. You know why? Because they like being cruel, lying hypocrites. They know that's what they're doing, and they like doing it. They revel in it. You're never going to change them by pointing out and accusing them of the very things they themselves take pride in. It's like trying to cure cancer with NyQuil. Forget about it. Pointing out hypocrisy, lies, and cruelty only matters to people with principles. What we're dealing with now are people who have abandoned their principles because they think they're getting revenge. And revenge is far sweeter to them than having principles. And it's also because they're power drunk and they profit off of it. When dealing with someone who is drunk off the profit of their revenge, you're not going to be able to appeal to their moral character. It won't stand a chance. So this video is not for them. I'm not even trying to be persuasive here. This video is for you, to warn you and to encourage you to push back, even if it just means showing up to vote next time, to let the powers that be know most emphatically that this is not what we want. And those of us who are in danger, the legal citizens accused of not belonging, the black person fired just for being black, the trans person, or even a non-passing cisgender woman using a woman's bathroom being told that she needs to prove that she's actually a woman, or the people accused of having an anti-Christian bias. We need you to stand up and say no, because they can always fuck with minorities. They're counting on nobody standing up for the minorities. They're relying on that. They're relying on you to be scared into just wanting to blend in and do nothing. But if enough people say no, then there's nothing they can do about it. I know I can't convince the ones doing it, but I can convince you, because if you don't, you're next. Because this is systematic deconstruction. They can't do it all at once. They can only do it piecemeal. But the fact that you'd be next is not the real reason to do it. I know that's not why you'd help. If you oppose these selfish monsters, it won't be out of self-preservation. It won't be out of your own selfishness, as would be the case for them. It will be because you have something they do not. It will be because you have a great strength that they mistake as a great weakness. It will be because you have empathy.
The fundamental weakness of Western civilization is empathy. I mean, it's really come as quite a shock to me that there is this level of really hatred and violence from the left. I always thought the left, or Democrats, were supposed to be the party of empathy, the party of caring.
Lastly, to the Christians who still at least try to follow the teachings of Jesus, is this how you want to be represented? Do you want to win by lying? Jesus said, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." If you choose Trumpism over truth, if you choose lies, then you will not be free. Think about that very thoroughly before you persist on this path, because it will destroy Christianity far more efficiently than I ever could. And you might ask, as an atheist, isn't that what I would want? To destroy Christianity? No, not if it's replaced by something far, far worse. And that's exactly what's going to happen if you don't defend your religion from the scoundrels pretending to fight for it, but who are actually just using it to steal the world. Choose. You can follow one or the other, but you can't follow both.
It's a foreboding I have, maybe ill-placed, of an America in my children's generation, or my grandchildren's generation, when all the manufacturing industries have slipped away to other countries, when we're a service and information processing economy, when awesome technological powers are in the hands of a very few, and no one representing the public interest can even grasp the issues. When the people have lost the ability to set their own agendas or even to knowledgeably question those who do so. When there is no practice in questioning those in authority. When clutching our crystals and religiously consulting our horoscopes our critical faculties in steep decline, unable to distinguish between what's true and what feels good. We slide almost without notice into superstition and darkness.